If it was, I think, what Ron Campo, the chair, was suggesting, that if there was a surplus of above $500,000, that we would move those funds to a designated fund balance is I guess the term that I'm looking for. The majority of the board didn't think that that was, the right thing to do. I think there was some questions about that. I think there's some issues legally whether we can do that we need to look at and we need to address. I think going forward, that's something I would strongly consider, although I was not in support of it this year because, frankly, I hadn't given it a lot of thought, and I thought I was being asked to make a decision too quickly on that. So that's certainly one opportunity there. And I think it's important to point out, too, that, one of the differences between the way the town and the school runs is the school district, any surplus immediately goes back to the taxpayer. And that represented in next year's tax rate is how that money goes back. So I think that, it's not as easy to just build a fund balance on the school side as it may be on the town side. So I think that's one opportunity. I think the other opportunity is take a good hard look at where else we can save and what efficiencies we can gain in other areas to cover that, what I'm going to call a debt, because that's what it's going to be. And it's going to be a debt that's going to be with us until we get the state to fix it.
All right, thank you. We had another question from the audience? He's the last one.
Is he the last one? Oh, okay, no. During the budget cycle this year, the school business administrator indicated that the school bus contract will end this year, and you'll be having to negotiate a new one probably for another 3 years. He also noted there wasn't a fuel increase clause in the last contract when gas prices were about $1 less a gallon. So with the likely event that you're going to be hit with a new contract at a much higher rate, would you support a fee for people that send their kids to school by bus to be assessed against them instead of all the other taxpayers of the town, and also a fee for athletic services for people whose children participate in athletic services in order to limit some of the tax burden to people that don't participate in those things?
George, we'll stay with you on that.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Tom. I appreciate that. I do believe that the contract expires FY10, but there's also an option on that contract for 2 more years. So it's entirely possible that we're not going to have to look at that for another 3 years. Now, the question the question that comes to my mind on that is, I think the option also allows for that no fuel increase, so that's something that I'd have to look at. But get to your question, I believe that state law says we have to transport children to school. So I'm not sure it's legally viable for us to charge somebody for the bus, at least till the age of 16, I believe. I can certainly find that out, but it's my understanding in the last 3 years on the board that that's how busing works. As far as athletics, I would not be a proponent of charging students for playing athletics. I think athletics is part of a rounded education, the same as I think that the chess club and the math club and Destination Imagination and everything else is part of a rounded education that we need to provide to our children. And I think that that is part of the obligation that all of us as members of this community take on.
All right, thank you. John?
The question about busing, no. I don't believe you charge kids to ride the school bus. The question that I have in my mind about busing, about school buses, is how come every morning 2 buses to the elementary school rattle down my street and both of them have about 10 kids in them? I mean, these are these big 60 people buses. Are we deploying the buses at the maximum efficiency? Are there ways that we can reroute some buses to get fewer buses on the street? Can we use smaller buses? Those are the kinds of questions that I think that we need to look at in areas such as transportation. In terms of user fees, well, my kids aren't athletes. Their participation has been in programs like LAFA and LISA, things like that, that you do pay to participate in. But if we get out of here on time today, I have a chance of making it down to the Derry Opera House to catch Grease. My two sons are in the pit orchestra for that. And the ticket I just held up cost $12 for adults, $8 for students. My two sons are in the marching band. They're going to China this year. Cha-ching, $3,000 per. They've in the past gone to Monarchs games. Cha-ching, $15 per parent to go watch them, and most parents go watch. The idea that kids, families aren't already paying additional costs for these programs is not true. They are. Whether there's a cost in terms of just to get in the door, to be allowed to sell LAFA raffle tickets and buy tickets for the drama club to see Grease and go pay admission to a high school football game to see your son play in the band is not something that I think is appropriate. As George said, it's part of a well-rounded education, and that is what we are obliged as a society to provide our children.
All right, thank you. And that kind of wraps up our school board candidate forum here. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for spending some time with us today. I know you didn't need to because you're running unopposed, but I think it is good that you get your responses and your feelings out to the public. Also, once again, as we've been here throughout the day, I'd like to thank our panelists, and I would like to thank the audience as well. We're going to take a short break, and then our next session is for the trustees of the Leach Library. So let's take 5. Thank you.